gmail.com. Okay, so next up on the program, we're going to talk a little bit about your brain. It's a terrible thing to waste, I've heard. And we're going to do that today with the expert from Clarity Brain Centers, where they do brain performance assessments, which I think is rather interesting. Dr. Alla Lysyk is here. Doctor, how are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Clarity Brain Centers is new.
New, very new to Fargo-Moorhead area. We opened in March of this year, and we're ready to serve the community with assessments of brain in a very contemporary way, using diagnostics as well as a typical bedside neurologic examination and consultation to better assess those kiddos, those adults. People get injured, whether it's sport, whether it's a slip and fall on the ice, car accidents, many, many reasons that the brain can be traumatized. And so I spent the last 25 years training about the brain.
Very interesting. And I'm always fascinated about the brain because what I've read about it is interesting to me in the sense that we really use a small capacity of the brain power we have. Is that right?
We do. That's what science at least tells us. And I think that we as subjects of this world can also agree that there are times where we probably should use more of it. People who have
Where's your brain?
Yeah, exactly.
Use your brain. Yeah.
And I love the brain too because I have one. And so I'm grateful for that. And so are you, I'm certain. The brain is just a fascinating thing. And what we know with science showing us that it's very plastic. It can change. And the old adage of, oh, you know, you're mature now, your brain's not going to grow anymore is so untrue because we've seen it over and over. People who have suffered trauma really can start to build new networks, and we call that neuroplasticity. And we try and utilize our knowledge of the nervous system to help push the brain into directions to reestablish these connections that may have been lost in light of trauma.
And back to the trauma in a moment, but if just Joe average citizen out there says, okay, maybe I'm using 10% of my brain, I don't know, whatever the number is, but I want to use 15. Imagine
Sure.
the change it would be.
Sure.
Are there things you can do?
Absolutely. The first and foremost assessment of how your brain is working is how you walk. Our gait tells us so much about our brain's capacities. So people may say things like, I'm stumbling more. I feel like I'm shuffling at times. I feel as though I don't know where my feet are at times. I feel like I'm disconnected from the rest of my body. And so they may also complain of postural changes that they may be feeling like they're bent forward, or family members are saying, you know, you're walking a bit different. Those signs really are key in understanding the brain because they're very, very much the window of opportunity for us to understand that the brain might be changing and not necessarily for the better. So that is one assessment that we certainly put value on. Other things that we want to look at is the reaction times that the brain has. The brain has to react in a specific period of time for it to be able to really show its beauty on this earth. We want to look at the eyes. The eyes are the window into the brain to understand whether that person can have that stability, that normal walking pattern, that ability to shift from one place to another and have attention and understand what their eyes are basically telling them about the world that they're in. We want to look at speeds of reactions too. Can we react, but do we react with the speed that we would, expect our brains to have? We look at different balance parameters in our office as well to understand how stable you are truly on your own feet in relationship to gravity. People who have suffered brain trauma have a tendency to fall backwards a lot, and that tendency needs to be resolved for them to move forward.
And if you don't have any of the issues that you mentioned that are sort of signs that maybe I need to look into this and do some more, are there just everyday average things that you can do so you're using more of your brain so that if you do end up with one of those issues, you have more capacity?
For sure. The one thing that we must do is move, because the body truly is just a sensory system. And so movement and vision and hearing and touch and cold and warm are sensory inputs that the brain utilizes in order to build its networks. So the act of moving is something super key. Of course, breathing is right in line with movement. And so people tend to hold their breath too frequently. People tend to have sleeplessness. People tend to have decreased energy because they're not sleeping well. So just increased activity is probably something that every one of us can put into our schedule to help us get to where we need to be.
Use the brain.
Use the brain.
I've heard puzzles, for instance, are a good idea, are they?
Sure, and that's going to activate more of the cognitive aspects of the brain, the frontal areas, if you will. Of course, you're using vision as well when you're looking at puzzles, but anything to help the brain calculate. So sequencing, doing things in order. If you feel like you're a disordered person, and some will label us as ADD or something that is, maybe not true, using things that help us stay in order, lists, keeping yourself on a routine always helps the brain progress, because once you've figured out one routine, you can add more to it, and that forces the brain to learn.
Very interesting. We're chatting today with the Clarity Brain Center expert, Dr. Lysyk, and brain performance assessments are things they do there. The baseline's really important, if for no other reason, if something should happen down the road.
Absolutely. Then we have a reference.
Right, yeah.
So kiddos are starting back to sport right now. We know, the news has told us over and over that concussion is a huge thing that's happening in sport. And so whether you're just, peewee player in the hockey arena, if you will, or if you're participating in football, soccer for women is an especially dangerous sport, resulting in head trauma. This brain performance assessment will help us determine where your start point is. And if we see things that are perhaps what we don't want to see in the baseline assessment, we can address it and get these kiddos on the right track so that if they do have impact, it's not going to be so detrimental.
So if, son and daughter comes in, they have a baseline, they end up in a athletic contest that causes a concussion. They come back in and you're able to say, okay, here's where you're at now and here's where your baseline was. What is the treatment to get them back?
So we do a variety of different things. We want to, of course, assess what part of the brain may have been traumatized, if that is what has happened to that kiddo from the baseline to the point of sport. We want to look at balance parameters. We want to look at visual reaction times, speeds of movements. We want to look at their ability to quickly move their eyes from one target location to another. We're going to assess, of course, gait and discuss that. We're going to just do a bedside neurologic examination where we're looking at reflexes. We're looking at their sensory systems. We're looking in those eyes and in those ears to assess balance, coordination, and reaction.
There is a hyperbaric oxygen treatment center clinic in Fargo now that I've talked to a number of people that have benefited from that. What do you think of that as a treatment
I
option?
think any tool that is available to us that helps the brain move in a direction with less resistance and less energy expenditure is brilliant.
Yeah. And some of this stuff is controversial in the medical field, at least.
Well,
right?
I think that, it's a timeline thing. We have to, over time, see what kind of outcomes we have. And we can't just use one specific tool in the box. We have to look at the whole box. Oxygen is available to all of us at all times. And so if a person doesn't take that breath in and doesn't breathe appropriately, maybe they've been injured and changed their postural reflexes, they don't have the capacity to take that deep breath properly. So whether we give them exogenous or outward oxygen source or just the oxygen that's in the room, there's a key element of having the nervous system control how you use that air.
I have a friend who had, some significant challenges in his childhood, a lot of physical abuse, a lot of mental abuse. And, he now believes that there is, 25 years later, brain damages affect him, and he has sometimes suicidal thoughts and all kinds of things he's dealing with. Can childhood trauma be a reason to come see you?
Absolutely. Every trauma is a memory for the brain, and it stores it. It stores it in different compartments, but eventually it will affect the body as it ages. There's no doubt it doesn't just go away.
Fascinating conversation. Clarity Brain Center is now open. Their website is claritybraincenters.com, claritybraincenters.com, or you can call 701-566-5306, 701-566-5306. Thank you so much. Appreciate it very much, Dr. Lysyk.
Thank you for having me.
Fascinating conversation. Love the brain. Terrible thing to waste. Brought to you in part